I'm Alec.
I'm Cameron.
Welcome back to Spill the Popcorn, and today we're going to be talking about Top Gun Maverick. First impressions on this movie, I remember one of my biggest issues with it initially was that I thought it was super corny, at least at the beginning. But I did concede that it's not a reboot, it's a sequel. It's still part of an 80s franchise. So I can respect now the fact that they kind of took the corny 80s vibe from the first one and continued it into this one, because it honestly seems like it would have been a disservice to have not kept up the style.
Yeah, I suppose that's fair. I did notice that about the movie, especially during the beginning. I don't know if I necessarily agree with what you said about how there needs to be some stylistic consistency between the two movies. Right off the bat, I should say I like this movie. I thought it was well done in virtually every respect. I did not like the corniness. I like Miles Teller. I think he did a good job in this movie, but they gave him a lot of... There were moments at which they gave him very little to work with in terms of dialogue. I think he said "damn it" probably 10 times without exaggeration in the movie, and I think once would have been too many. One "damn it" is always too many in any movie, I think, and he had to say it 10 times. The dialogue, not all the dialogue was bad. Some of the dialogue was quite good. Most of it was, I think, especially at the end of the movie. I did feel like there was a lot of dialogue that I had to overlook, but I feel like it was relatively easy to overlook the shortcomings in that area, given the extent to which the other elements worked well, I should say. I understand why the filmmakers would have been inclined to include a romance subplot, but I don't know if that particular thread added a whole lot to this particular movie.
I will say, I think the Jennifer Connelly thing, back to my previous point, it's a Top Gun movie, you have to have the romance. I will say, I feel like that was meant to be more of Maverick's human part, because if that was removed, he's just a pilot. He's always been a pilot.
I understand why it was there, but it didn't really feel like they ultimately justified its conclusion with actual substance. It seems like it was there, like I said a second ago, it was there just to be there. They were checking the box, that's what it felt like.
I remember at the end of the movie, after all the action was concluded, being like, okay, next scene is going to be Jennifer Connelly's scene, because obviously that's going to be the falling action after that. And I to your point, I was thinking, oh, okay, predictable. But I guess I wasn't as upset by it as you, just because I thought it did serve a purpose, even if it wasn't she didn't have a whole lot of depth.
They could have done more, but they did what they kind of needed to do with it, I should say.
Yeah.
But they didn't do anything more than that.
I thought at the beginning of the movie, it was almost just the first movie with slight tweaks.
Yeah, there were every single element in the first act, I think, was an analog to an element from the first film.
When his Ed Harris is like, well, I want to punish you, but looks like you're going to Top Gun. It's like, okay, that was literally a scene from the first movie.
He even meets Jennifer Connelly in a bar, and he comes back the next day. He is Kelly McGillis' character. He is the Top Gun Maverick analog of Top Gun's Kelly McGillis character.
I think it walked the line between homage and just being
derivative.
Yeah, from kind of everybody talks about The Force Awakens just being A New Hope rehashed.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the same vibe I was getting at the beginning of the movie.
I agree that they were trading the line between homage and rehash, but I think ultimately they did not cross over into the latter territory.
Yeah.
But they got really close, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And they digressed enough at the end to make
there was enough novelty, enough original
content.
Substance, I should say. The very first thing that comes to mind is how much I liked the third act.
I was surprised by the double third act at first.
I was too, yeah.
I thought it was going to end with Maverick getting shot down, and then there's a whole other, way more important sequence after that where he and Rooster fly. So that shocked me at first, and I was like, it kind of threw me off pacing-wise.
Yeah.
But I'm glad they did it.
Yeah, I think it ended up paying off.
It added novelty, and made it less predictable, and it was.
And they had to have that. They had to have.
Yeah, but you didn't really know they had to have, or at least me, I didn't really know they had to have that until they had it. Then I'm like, well, of course they had it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, the first two acts. I guess if I were to just summarize all my qualms with the first two acts in one sentence, it would be. To me, it seemed like everything was a build-up to the third act, and it did not seem like filmmakers felt that all that build-up needed to justify its own conclusion, needed to justify its own inclusion.
One of the things I also appreciated from the movie was the fact that it kind of leaned into its predictability at times, like when Miles, but then like digressed from it. For the next 20 minutes after Maverick is appointed team leader, the entire movie is basically telling the audience this guy's not going to survive the mission. When like he's on the beach with Jennifer Connelly and she's basically saying like forever goodbye, and then he's talking to Rooster, and they're like, oh, we gotta go, and he's like, I'll tell you when we land, which is like obviously this dude's gonna die. I've seen this a million times. Because of that, every time he was about to die in the movie, I'm like, this is where he's gonna die. So
yeah, I feel like that was intentional. I feel like they wanted you to think that he was about to die every time you thought he was about to die.
Yeah, so they used predictability to make it less predictable. And because they made me expect that he's gonna die using the like cliches of the movie, I was then surprised every time he didn't die, which I thought worked well. I thought that the conflict between Rooster and Maverick was a little weird at first. With like, is he mad that he killed his dad or killed his papers, or is he mad that he pulled his papers?
It ends up being both.
It does end up being both. It seemed like they couldn't decide which one. Like even if they were trying to make it both, it's like, oh, surface level he's mad at him for pulling his papers, but really deep down it still goes back to Goose's death. I feel like that's what they were going for, like a layered conflict, but it ended up seeming like they just couldn't pick one.
I will say, I thought that the dynamic between Maverick and Rooster was very weird for the entirety of the first two acts. I thought their conflict was very surface level, it was predictable, everything they said to each other, it was like, okay, of course they were going to say that, but they ought to say something else to make it a little more interesting.
I feel like that goes back to the comment about how this movie used elements from the first movie but changed the characters. But I feel like it wasn't as singular, which I actually think they did well. Sometimes it tripped up a little bit. Rooster was kind of Iceman in that he was the one with the main conflict with Maverick. But Rooster was also, in the end, Goose, because he's Goose's son. And Hangman was Iceman as well. And Maverick was Maverick, but he was also Kelly McGillis in that one scene. So everyone, it was like the same roles were there, but everyone was kind of...
It wasn't just a copy-paste,
Yeah, they were like hot potatoing the roles, which I think added some depth to it.
I agree, yeah. I think that particular part was done well.
So, final thoughts on Top Gun Maverick. I guess I'll start with visuals. Super cool that they used real planes. It all looks very real. It would be tough to mess up visuals after shooting for like 800 hours. So yeah, I think visuals, I'd give it an S just because they really went for it, and I think it paid off.
I mean, there was a dedication to authenticity on the filmmaker's part that I think paid off very well. I was just really impressed with how everything looked and how everything felt. I think I'm going to lump in sound design with this just because I think the two go hand in hand. The look and the sound of the planes, that's something that the filmmakers had to get perfect in order for their vision to be realized, I guess. I'd say that the visual element is probably the highlight of the movie, or the area in which the film is the strongest. So I would agree and say that I would also give the visual element an S.
So in terms of acting, kind of to your point earlier, I'll agree that there were some weak points, more weak points with the dialogue than the acting, I feel like. I remember thinking a couple times that Tom Cruise acted a lot with his mouth. He'll clench his jaw, then he'll like open his mouth and quiver his lip. Not that it was bad, I just, it was noticeable. It was noticeable. Yeah. But other than that, I think everyone did, like you said, the best with what they could, or the best they could with what they had. I'd still give it an A. I think just because it wasn't like, I wasn't blown away.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to agree on most of those points. The only actor, or I should say actress in this case, that I think was consistently a little bit disappointing is Jennifer Connelly. It seemed like they were trying to force a little bit of chemistry between those characters. I feel like Jennifer Connelly had to pick up a lot of that slack, and sometimes she didn't quite deliver just because she had so much extra legwork to do. I mean, Tom Cruise had to do the same thing, but I think he did I think he did a slightly better job of picking up that slack. I think he was pretty good. I think he was quite good actually throughout the entirety of the movie. I think he did a better job in this one than he did in the original, which can probably be attributed at least in part to the fact that his character is a little bit more nuanced in this one. Miles Teller, like I said, had a couple weak moments, but I think that's because his dialogue was a little bit funny. Throughout the rest of the movie, I think he was very good. One of the other highlights, acting-wise. Some of the ancillary characters, like Phoenix and Bob, they didn't have much to do script-wise, so they also probably were having to do a little bit of extra legwork as actors. But yeah, just to focus on like the performances on the part of like the main cast. Tom Cruise was great. Miles Teller was great for the most part. Jennifer Connelly was kind of weak, I think. So overall, I'd probably give acting A-. Alright, so on to narrative. What are your thoughts?
Narrative, like I said at the beginning of the movie, seemed a little derivative. I did like how they factored in references to the first one later, but didn't make them as derivative. I was surprised but happy with the double third act thing. And then the second act, all the training stuff, I mean, it was never boring, even though it could have been, just because they are just training the whole time.
Yeah.
I think I would give narrative an A.
Right, so I did have my fair share of qualms with the second act, and I suppose the first act as well, even though I suppose I did a good job of setting everything up. The fact that the third act worked so well has to be attributed, at least in part, to how well everything was set up in the first two acts. So I've got to give credit where credit is due there. I feel like I'm being a little too hard on those first two acts. I don't think they were bad, and I think there were some really good moments, but I think it dragged at parts because it was just trying to set up the third act. Maybe they focused a little bit too much on the spectacular like flight training sequences when they could have spent a little bit more time adding depth or nuance to some of the other narrative threads, like, for instance, the Jennifer Connelly subplot. I thought it was very riveting. I was on the edge of my seat. When I thought it was over, and then it turns out it wasn't over, at first I was like, okay, how much longer is this movie going to be? And then obviously, like you said, that next part was even more important than the first, and it was just as, like, tense, if not more so. So I was immediately hooked again. There was a part at which I thought, okay, if they add one more complication to the second part of the third act, it's going to feel overstuffed. And then it ended. Like, at the perfect time. If they'd gone a moment longer, I think it would have been overstuffed. All that just to say, it wasn't perfect, but at the end, I felt really good about it. It definitely took me in the direction that it wanted to take me, that the filmmakers wanted it to take me. On a narrative level, I'd like to give it an A-. I feel like because the what worked didn't quite compensate for what didn't work, I'm kind of leaning toward B+. Out of respect for the effort that was put into pretty much every element of the movie, I'll opt for the A- rather than the B+. First genuinely good movie I have seen for the first time in a while.
Given everything you just said and everything I just said, it sounds like we agree on just about everything. If I had to give it like one grade overall, I'd give it an A-. I don't think I didn't cry or anything. Didn't cheer or anything. But it was a good movie. I enjoyed it. So A-.
Just because I'm about to give it a holistic score, I'll kind of go back on what I said and give the narrative alone maybe like a B+. Just because I think that is not the department in which the movie was the strongest, even though I do think it was strong in that department. So I'll go with the B+ on the narrative level, and on a holistic level, because everything else worked as well as it did, I'll go with the A-.
That concludes our discussion of Top Gun Maverick. Like and subscribe, and maybe give us a movie you want us to review next for next time. I'm Alec.
I'm Cameron.
And this was Spill the Popcorn. See you next time.